Hi, you're listening to After Dinner Conversations, short stories for long discussions. What that means is we get short stories, we select those short stories, and then we discuss them specifically about the ethics and the morality of the choices the characters and the situations put us in. Why did you do this? What makes you do this? What makes us good people? What's the nature of truth, goodness, all of that sort of stuff. And hopefully we're all better, smarter people for it and learn a little bit about why we think the way we think. So thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us once again for After Dinner Conversation, short stories for long discussions, where we take the short stories from the After Dinner publication and we talk about them and talk about the ethics and the morals of them, and we just have a grand old time. If you'd like to ever submit a story for us to publish and maybe discuss, you could do that on our website, After Dinner Conversation. You can also read other stories by just going to our website or going to Amazon and typing that in. And if you'd like to support what we're doing, you can do that by supporting us on Patreon at afterdinnerconversation.com patreon.com/afterdinnerconversation. Sorry, it's backwards. And I think I'm Kolby, one of your co-hosts, and we have Ashley.
Hello.
I know, I'm totally flustered, man. It's like so many weeks of doing the social distancing versions of this. And Jeremy.
Hello. Hi, I'm Jeremy.
And he is here with Sarah.
Hello.
He's joining us once again.
Sarah is me.
And joining us again. Okay, and so the story is, Jeremy, you're going with Pneumadectomy?
Pneumadectomy by Harris Coverley.
Thank you very much. And so the story is different than what we normally get. Number one is it's not really like a sci-fi fantasy. It's a little bit grounded in sort of like, but with like one minor twist. So the story is that there is a boy who has something wrong with his appendix, and so he has his appendix taken out in order to like save his life because he's got appendix issues. He goes to play baseball with the neighborhood kids, and you find out that the neighborhood kids won't play with him because he, quote unquote, doesn't have a soul, and that's creepy to them. Flash over to the research, and what they find out is there's some guy in India, and we just have to sort of take this as true within the framework of the story, that he accidentally, purposely figures out by modifying a CAT scan machine that your soul lives in your appendix. And so sometimes when you're having appendix issues, it's a biological issue. But sometimes when you're having appendix issues, it's actually that your soul is hurt, like you've hurt a loved one, or you've fallen out with your faith or whatever, and that causes your soul to be sort of hurt, which causes your appendix to hurt, which causes you to go to the hospital. And they say it's about a 50-50. And so the kid we don't know why the kid got his appendix taken out for which of those reasons, but he is now effectively a soulless kid. Oh, and when you take the appendix out, your soul actually goes with the appendix, and so you now are soulless. The kid then goes to visit, at the end of the story, one of his friends, his neighborhood friends, and the neighborhood friend kid is dead because he also had an issue with his appendix/soul, and his mom opted not to have the appendix taken out. The appendix got infected or had some biology issue, and the kid died. So in our final sort of scoreboard, what you have is one parent who chose to have the appendix taken out and have the kid vaguely socially ostracized for not having a soul, and another parent who chose not to have the appendix taken out and had her kid die from that infection. Okay, so obviously the big leap of faith in this story, and if you can make this leap, then the rest of it becomes totally discussable, is that number one, we have a soul, and number two, that soul lives in our appendix. And that somehow, when you take out your soul and your appendix, you're still a person. Like the automatic doors at the grocery store still open, right? That they're not like, you don't have a soul, or that like cats don't bump into you because they can't see you. that this is, you have to buy into the sort of the one lie, and that this is true. So assuming that's all true, that gets us started. Sarah, I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you want to talk about maybe the things that you liked or disliked about it, that you found interesting or not interesting?
The location of the soul seemed a little bit ridiculous to me, but I think it was supposed to be set up that way. Like, I guess I understand why the author chose the appendix as the location, because we don't exactly know what the appendix does.
Right, it's an otherwise
reality,
useless
right?
organ.
So you're kind of setting it up to be, this is kind of a realistic scenario. Like, maybe this is the purpose of the appendix, to be like the little case of where the soul lives. And say we find that out someday, and we've been removing these, thinking that it was just a useless part of our anatomy.
Right.
So that's kind of an interesting setup.
And it also helps in that it's a part of your body that you don't need biologically. So, like, if your soul had been in your foot, like, that one would have been absurd. That it would have been in an area that, like, we know what it does. It's for walking. And number two, like, you kind of need a foot. Like, you're not just going to get it taken out normally. Or if it was in your lungs or your heart or something, like, you're not going to be like, oh, take out my heart, but I'll keep living. So I think it works in her framework, or the author's framework, I should say his framework, in that it's something we don't really know what it does. You don't really need it as far as we know. You know. So yeah, it matches that mysteriousness category pretty well.
I thought it was an interesting, there was an interesting out in it where the mother of Raleigh, the boy whose appendix was removed, reassures him by telling him that they aren't exactly sure that's where this soul resides. So that they're leaving it open that these doctors and these studies could possibly be wrong.
Yeah. And I wondered when I read that if she was saying that to be polite, like to like give him hope, or if she was saying that because that was true. Like, because I assume that parents will sometimes be like, no, honey, you're really, you're the most beautiful kid at school. And in the back of their mind, their kid's like, my kid is ugly. Like, look, I'm ugly. You got my genetics. And so you're ugly. But I can't have you going through life thinking that you're broken, that you're some ugly kid. So I'm going to tell you that, like, lots of people only have a couple of good teeth. And so I wondered, and it doesn't clarify it too well, but I wondered if she was saying it could have gone either way, right? It could have been her just being nice to give her child hope, or it could have been like, sugar is bad for you. No, now sugar is good for you. No, fat is bad for you. Now fat is good for you. Okay, but only certain kinds of fat. Like, yeah, in 50 years.
And right, that may have just what he was referencing as well, is that medical, those kinds of things in medical culture waver back and forth based on new evidence. So, right now, this is what they think, but it's going to change in the future.
Yeah, and then maybe they'll find out that thing that showed up in the CAT scan was like a portal to another dimension.
Smudge.
It was just a smudge, right? It was just somebody had a little bit of curry, and they just were like, "Oops, sorry about that." I was adjusting the screen, and I never wiped it clean later. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it really talks about like how people believe things. So you have the other mother who really believes that this is the location of the soul.
Right.
To the extent where she allows her child to die.
Right. And that it's important for some reason. So she lets him die.
So you have to first buy the doctor's argument, and then you have to second believe that it does have a significance. And at some point, I guess in the afterlife is where
when there's no evidence for that.
Right. Yeah, and that was the thing that I understood why the author had to do it, but it seems like you don't really need a soul. Like, it wasn't like at any point they were like, once you've had your soul removed, you seem oddly okay with making harder decisions. Like, like, you seem terribly comfortable. You seem more comfortable with the death penalty than you did before. Right? Like, you just, I don't know. And so I guess in that sense, you have to, you're right, Jeremy, you have to believe that the soul serves a purpose other than what we see in behavior while you're alive today.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know. Ashley, what are you thinking?
As much as we want to think that this is futuristic, there are religions where there are certain part of the bodies that are considered sacred. For some religions, you do not get a blood transfusion. We don't care if you're going to die. If you don't get one, you don't get one. And so it's like, okay, well, for them, that's just their reality. You can tell them, no, it's not in there. There's nothing wrong with getting a blood transfusion. It doesn't change who you are, but to them it would.
Yeah.
And so as much as we want to think of this as something strange, this is reality for people today.
I totally forgot I had a roommate. I'm not a roommate. I dated someone whose roommate was like this in college.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember what the religion is. I'm sure I could Google it really quickly, but I thought about it. But she believed that her faith believed that you should never pierce your skin. That it was a sin to pierce your skin because it was like a vessel of God. And so no needles. Never could get a vaccine that required a shot. Never could get a blood draw. Never could go to the hospital because they were going to stick a needle in you. Nothing. And so, like, my first question was, how did your roommate make it? I think we were 19 or 20 at the time. Like, how did she make it to 20? Like, how do you not break an arm or break something that gets infected that requires you to get
don't ever step on a nail, on a rusty nail, because you're already screwed.
But yeah, to go to Ashley's point, this is not. That would be stepping on a screw. To go to Ashley's point, though, this is not as far-fetched as, like, it's belief, right? It's faith. So,
So that's why I struggled with this story. Your first question in the discussion questions is, do you believe a person has a soul? Not in the context of the way that this story presents it. I personally don't believe there is such a thing, to a certain degree. But it in the way that's where your entire being is held. I know.
But
that really short. I was like, I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem. I don't understand.
But did you?
Why are they ostracizing this kid? His soul doesn't exist anyway.
But let me jump in though, just to add one twist to it. But even if you don't believe in it, which is totally makes reasonable contention, you certainly could understand that other kids would tease kids for not having a soul. Like, it would just give them something to tease you about.
Again, it's learned behavior. Mm-hmm. The kid says, I can't talk to you because my dad said you don't have a soul. The kid, you can't tell. That's the thing. If that kid would have been like, oh, I was just sick for a little bit, and he comes back and plays with them, would they have known that he was different or had a missing soul?
Yeah.
No, and I don't think they would have.
That's the way the story
he was probably gone from school because it sets it up like this surgery happened recently.
Yeah.
So he was gone from school for a period of time. The kids all knew something was up. I mean, if you assume his
the
middle
rumor
school,
mill takes care of it.
But
yes, absolutely.
But again, if he would have returned,
it probably doesn't matter. Sorry, it probably doesn't matter what he was in the hospital for. Everybody's just going to assume, oh, you had your appendix removed.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the experiments so I wrote this question in because this is an experiment that I got from a Simpsons episode. So when you talk to most people, not all, but most people, and you say, do you believe that you have a soul? I have found that most of my friends, because I run with a certain group, mostly secular, will say, no, I don't believe in the soul. Like, our brain creates this belief that we have sentience and a soul and blah, 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 blah. But, I'm agnostic or I'm an atheist or whatever. I just don't believe in a soul. Now, I take those same people and I say, would you write on a piece of paper? This was question number 4, I think. The holder of this piece of paper is the keeper of my soul. And then you pierce your thumb and you put a little bloody thumbprint on it. Will you sell me that piece of paper for $5? Almost universally, people will say no. And I'll be like, wait a minute. You just told me that you don't believe in a soul. That's correct. But you're not willing to write on a piece of paper, I'm selling you my soul for $5 with a bloody thumbprint. That's correct. So
was it just a question of money? Like, I want more than $5 for this?
Well, but here's the thing. If you don't believe in a soul at all, you should believe you're selling me something worthless. right?
Yeah,
you should be.
but clearly you value it, so I should get as much money as I can for this.
I don't think it was a matter of money. I think when I asked people why they wouldn't do it, they would say, "I don't believe in a soul, but like maybe." Like that was kind of what they would come up with, right? Which I'm like, look, if you're a maybe, then you should probably be going to church.
My concern is there are people who believe super, super deeply that the soul, A, does exist,
yeah,
and B, if you go to a country or an area where you it probably exists out there that you can be punished for something about your soul, and all of a sudden that piece of paper, now you're in danger.
You go to some like random country where they're like, we know soulless people here are subject to death.
Yeah, and all of a sudden now it's been revealed that you gave away your soul, like you're going to be hanged.
Yeah.
Like, I would be like, I just don't want to put myself in that risk, even though it's a very small risk.
Yeah. Jeremy, would you sell me that piece of paper?
Probably don't want to go to that country anyways.
Yeah, they're probably not very liberal about a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Jeremy, would you sell me that piece of paper?
Not for $5.
Only because you know I'd pay more?
No, Jeremy's like a cent.
I mean, if you're willing to buy it, shouldn't you be willing to spend some significant money on it?
So are we just haggling at this point? Like,
so fine.
Yeah,
$100. Like, what is your price then, Jeremy? What's your price for your soul?
Well, not for your soul, for the piece of paper that says this is my soul.
Right, just for the piece of paper.
He thinks it doesn't mean anything.
Is there a price for it?
I don't know. I have not thought about that. I would actually have to have a legitimate offer.
I'm going to make you that offer, dude. I will.
I have $1 million in Monopoly money.
I will pay.
That's the equivalent.
I will PayPal you $20 if you will do this. I'll let Sarah hold it for me until I can collect it.
No, not for 20. I would still. It would have to be a significant amount. It would have to be like $1,000.
But now, why are you holding back?
Yeah, why? Because I know you don't believe. I think you don't believe in a soul. I think you're an atheist or agnostic. So I think what you're selling me is like the Brooklyn Bridge. Like, surely you would sell me the Brooklyn Bridge for $5.
No, I think I would still try to get more for that. I'm a little more of a grifter than that. Sorry.
All right, let me make it harder for you. Would your dollar amount change if it was getting your kids to sell it to you? If I'm like, all right, so you're $1,000. What about for your daughter? Like, would you just have her do this for me and sign this piece of paper and give it to me? Like, does your dollar amount, like, are you willing to bet your own belief system, but not your child's?
That's a good question.
I would probably ask children's
for
souls now?
At least the same amount of money. Yeah, $1,000.
But it's like
I'll get her to put a bloody fingerprint on a piece of paper for you.
But it's like selling me the Brooklyn Bridge. You could sell it 1,000 times. What do you care?
Oh, that's
I can only sell it to you once.
Somebody's going to catch on eventually.
Yeah, Sarah, what about you? Are you willing to do the piece of paper?
Yeah, I don't really think it matters.
So for $5, you'd sell me and sell every other person who wanted to buy it a piece of paper?
Not if the going price is $1,000.
I feel like that's dishonest, but I guess if you're dumb enough to give me the money for a piece of paper that simply says this means the bearer owns my soul now?
Yeah.
Has somebody ever tried to do that in a court of law?
I don't think so.
Something like that? Like something that's arbitrary, like does not exist, and they're trying to claim like, oh, he gave me the rights to...
Oh, yeah, you can't sell what you don't own.
Yeah, so in a court of law, this wouldn't even hold up.
Well...
So you don't have to worry about that part.
I mean, unless the court thinks that it's something you own, or something that you can even sell. It might be like your appendix. You know, you can give it away, but you can't sell it.
What about you? How much is your soul worth? If I asked you for $5,
I don't believe in a soul, so
You're okay?
I would do it for free because what does it freaking matter to me? Like it doesn't. Like
lowest offer.
The cost in my mind is how much money do you have to pay me to prick my finger and draw blood? Like that hurts.
Right.
Like
how much is a Band-Aid?
Would I do it for a beer?
Can you use someone else's blood?
I'd do it for goat blood. I'd do it for a beer. Heck yeah. Knowing that I could, because here's the argument that I think comes from this, and I want to get back to the story, is if you're unsure about selling that piece of paper, then that means you're unsure about a soul. Like you're willing to talk a big game, but you're not positive. And if you're not positive, then there's a whole bunch of other things that come out of that. That means maybe you should be like going to church once in a while because you're risking eternity. I don't know. Sarah's just laughing at me at this point.
Well, we're also laughing at Ravenna. She just came by and dropped off a joke. If the soul
Don't
is
repeat
really
this.
no,
Oh, that's
Come on now, you have
too late. Gotta
to.
do it now.
does it have a bloody thumbprint on it?
Come on.
No.
If it was really in the appendix, there would be a disproportionate amount of appendectomies performed on gingers
I can't believe you said
because
that
they have no
out
souls.
No, because they have no soul.
Look at Ashley's face says it all.
Oh. I'm glad Ravenna's getting a kick out of this discussion. Let me ask you this then. How about this one? This is a different question. Going back to the story, would you be okay, given the sort of scenario that we've got here, assuming it is true, that they believe it's true, that there's been some peer research, blah blah. Would you be okay with being friends with someone who'd had their appendix removed?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
I feel like
the world of the story absolutely allows for this to be untrue, for the soul not to be in the appendix. So you still have two camps of people, and I think it's completely allowable to be in the camp of people that's like, oh, I'm not so sure. It's okay that you don't have a soul, but like, what does a soul mean to you? Does it mean that you're a good person? Do you have to have a soul? Do you have to believe in a soul in order to be a good person? Is it the belief that gives us that moral compass? Do you really think that? Because I don't.
Well, I think in the story, at least one of the ways that your appendix becomes inflared is because you have some spiritual problem, right? I think the guy was talking about his relationship with his wife or his girlfriend. There was another one where he was having some crisis of faith. And so at least in the story, they make the leap that the sort of mental crises normally associated with a soul are what causes inflammation in your appendix.
It's a big leap.
It is. It's a big leap.
Does that mean people who no longer have appendixes are now okay with the crises that come up?
That it at least doesn't cause a physical reaction, right?
in the same way.
And if that's the case...
Wouldn't it be preferable not to have a soul?
Maybe if you had to make tough decisions.
Or is this part of, again, going back, this is the built-in deterrent to those kinds of actions?
Well, what do you mean by tough decisions, Kolby?
Well, I think the idea would be that somehow when you're making sort of decisions that are decisions of conscience, that you would have sort of regret, or whether they'd be questions of faith or questions of morality or whatever, you just wish you could take something back. That, according to the story, that causes a physical reaction in your appendix, unrelated to biology. They, in the story, have dubbed that a soul. So the thing the story doesn't address is, if you don't have that appendix, number one, do you still have that same crisis of conscience? Because the thing that seems to be giving you that crisis of conscience is no
the
longer
inflammation of your appendix.
Right, is no longer in your body.
So now you no longer have a barometer of pain.
Right, so you can logically... They don't really get into it, but the theory would be, I think, in the story, is that you can still logically make decisions that you regret, but not ones that sort of hurt in your heart.
Do you really think so? Because Rolly seems to be having quite the crisis of conscience. The kid who just had his appendix removed. He really does seem to be in quite a bit of crisis.
I don't know.
He seems to be hurting a lot.
He does seem to be hurting a lot. But I don't... And again, I don't know if the story doesn't explain.
Maybe he just doesn't experience physical discomfort now. Like, he can still be hurting, but not like, oh, I'm hurting and now my appendix hurts as well.
Yeah, I don't know. I think you make a great point, though, Sarah. I think the way I read the story, and it's just my own interpretation, was that you can still have regret You can still be sad. You can still wish you had done something different. But there is something unique about us that makes it special. That gives you a certain kind of thing that where like you've made a decision that makes your soul hurt, which is different than having a decision that makes your brain hurt. If that makes sense. And so he can be sad that he didn't get to play kickball with his friends, but that's a problem of the brain, not of the soul. If that makes sense.
Then good for him. Now he doesn't have to hurt in two different ways.
Good point.
Like in some way, say you're mentally disturbed. Like say depression. Say when you're like physically depressed, it makes your right big toe hurt a lot. And all of a sudden now you decide to amputate the toe. Well, guess what? Now you're still mentally like suffering of depression, but your toe doesn't hurt anymore because you don't have a toe. That's the way I'm kind of seeing it.
Mm.
Do you think that people who are able to make those decisions without the physical effects, it would make them able to make the decisions because they have a different moral compass now that they don't have a soul?
I think you could have this is just the way I read it. And so I'm trying to like just steer a little bit, but I want to hear what you guys have to say too, is I think the reason I put the question in is, am I okay that there are people who can make decisions that they logically regret and are frustrated and wish they'd made different ones, and they're sad and they're happy, all those things that sort of the brain does. But the people that I am...
Hi, this is Kolby, and you are listening to After Dinner Conversation, short stories for long discussions. But you already knew that, didn't you? If you'd like to support what we do at After Dinner Conversation, head on over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/afterdinnerconversation. That's right, for as little as $5 a month, you can support thoughtful conversations like the one you're listening to. And as an added incentive for being a Patreon supporter, you'll get early access to new short stories and ad-free podcasts, meaning you'll never have to listen to this blurb again. At higher levels of support, you'll be able to vote on which short stories become podcast discussions. And you'll even be able to submit questions for us to discuss during these podcasts. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being the kind of person that supports thoughtful discussion.
And wish they'd made different ones, and they're sad and they're happy, all those things that sort of the brain does. But the people that I am good friends with, the people that I care about, I think, and this is going to sound really hypocritical given what I said earlier about the piece of paper, I don't know if I would want someone to be a close friend that didn't have a look upon their face that their soul hurt from things that they have been asked, that they have done or been asked to do. Like there's a certain kind of character that I see in people sometimes that I couldn't explain it. I couldn't explain it that your brain was doing it to you.
Because I don't think having your appendix or your soul removed would change that character in people, because that's not really where that's coming from. Because
this is why I'm a hypocrite, because I think maybe it does.
But you think that's changing in these people when their appendix is removed?
I do. I think they can be totally functioning people with happiness and sadness and regret and frustrations and all those things logically, but not in a way that sort of seeps into their being.
So did the mother just disable her child? Does she now, do you disagree with the mother saving her kid then? Because she set him up for a life of disability?
I might. Yeah, I actually might.
Easier to make decisions that would hurt other people without having real consequences for those decisions now that you don't have a soul.
No, I think you can still make those decisions, and I think you can still feel bad about hurting other people. But and maybe I'm just projecting something that you guys don't feel. But I feel like I when I meet someone who's particularly older people who've had a harder go at it, there's something about interacting with them that makes me feel like you've seen some stuff, and it's seeped into you in a way that permeates yourself.
So
and to me, that's sort of a soul.
Okay, so do you think Raleigh is not going to be that kind of person because he doesn't have a soul?
I think I do.
So you're okay with someone selling you that part of themselves for $5?
Yeah, I think I changed my mind.
Whoa.
I like how you talked yourself out of it yourself. Like,
Yeah, no, I think I've changed my mind, actually, since we've been doing this podcast.
so people have a soul now for Kolby.
But I mean, if you're willing to sell it to me...
But he surrounds himself with people that don't believe they have a soul.
Yeah, I think two things would have to make it matter. First, you'd have to believe that it matters beyond death. That you have to believe in an afterlife.
Yeah.
A promise of reward or punishment for a life lived well or poorly. And you have to believe that that's some sort of, that the possession of the soul is what spurs people to be good and to live a good life. Like,
and that's what they bring up in the book. They bring up about having, or in the story about meeting. There were souls, and in all likelihood, there was a god or gods in an afterlife or some sort of where the soul would go to meet them. So it like in that sense, for you to go to afterlife, that's where your soul would go.
Yeah, because your body's dead.
Yeah.
And that raises the question for me about the story.
I never thought I would be the most religious person in the room. In any room, ever. I never thought that day would come.
I actually go to church, though, so...
Yes.
Then why? Why? Then wait a minute. Then why are you selling me this? Why are you selling me the piece of paper? What kind of hypocrite are you, church-going soul seller?
No. It's a church for atheists. Don't worry about it.
So here's a question about the story. To bring it back to the story.
All right, thank you.
If your soul is removed when your appendix removed, does it go to heaven at that time? Is your soul already there and you don't have to worry about it?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a little bit like arguing about who'd win in a fight between like Thor and Spider-Man, right? But yeah, I understand your point. I think in the story, maybe it does mean that when you've removed your soul, it's the equivalent of you dying, so your soul moves on. I don't know.
I think they say that that's unknowable.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, it's unknowable now. I don't know how to be unknowable.
I mean, there's still a lot that's unknowable in this, which is, it kind of brings us right back to the same types of questions regarding spirituality that we already have. Just because somebody thinks they found it in the appendix doesn't apparently change any of what we already know or don't know.
Right, and then someday we find out
we're still in the same
good for
place.
You, and they're like, "Oh, sorry, you just let your kid die for a soul that we just realized." Like, no, that wasn't a soul.
Well, I just like to relate this to like alternative medicine. Like, look at chakras. Like, touching your right earlobe is healing your liver, or certain. There's only so much that like medicine can take us, because there is this placebo effect that, oh, if I do this, maybe it does. To those people, the right earlobe is literally connected to the liver. And people have healed that way. And maybe it's a placebo effect, or maybe it is true, and we just don't have the technology or way to prove that. So in this sense, it's like we might think there is a soul in the appendix. And in this case, they discovered it, or at least they thought they discovered it. There's going to be this decisive two ways of thought that, all right, your soul is so important it can't be removed from the appendix, like the mom who let her child die versus the one that would let her child live and have it removed.
Yeah. Hey, let me ask one last question before we run out of time here. Do you think that the mom who let her kid die, do you think she is in any way morally culpable?
Yeah, and I think she believes that she is too.
Really? Okay, based on the text of the story?
Yeah, look at the way it ends. I mean, she's not doing very well.
Mm-mm.
Well, yeah,
she's regretting her choice.
Nobody's gonna let their kid die and not regret it. I mean, regret's different than thinking you made the wrong choice.
But if you believe that's wholeheartedly, here you are, you believe that your kid should never have their skin punctured or have a blood transfusion or have an organ transplant. They're going to maybe regret that, but they're not regretting their decision. They're debating their religion, their relationship with their faith in some regard. They're like, they're like, oh, I regret my decision. So you regret following your religious path? Because that is what you went off to make that decision.
Jeremy, what do you think? Moral culpability in the lady who let her kid die?
Yeah, definitely moral culpability. But in the same way that she regrets what happened, or regrets her choice, but she may not question whether she did the right or wrong thing, but she still regrets the choice.
So if...
How about she just misses her kid? A lot.
And that's what I mean.
Well, she could also believe that she's going to meet him again in the afterlife, which the blood transfusion thing actually reminded me of that, because that's what the Jehovah's Witnesses believe, is that if you get a blood transfusion, you might survive, but you can't be resurrected in the world that is to come.
Yeah.
So you'll never be with your family again.
Mm-hmm.
You'll be separated from your family. So it's worth it to them to make that choice so that they can live together forever in the afterlife.
So
if you do believe that, I guess you can release yourself from the moral culpability. You can. But
so that's a perfect example of the mothers. This mother's like, I would rather you be with me right here, right now, without a soul, and we can live together, versus the other mom who was like, I believe in this afterlife and I'm going to see you again, so I need you to go now.
I'll take eternity over 50 years. Yeah.
Utilitarian ethics.
It's their belief that there isn't even an eternity. There is no proof of that.
And they completely believe that they have hard proof of this afterlife being.
Oh, okay.
Well, no. I mean, they believe in the soul, right, in the story, but not in the afterlife. Like that. I mean, I guess it's fate.
Well, that's what the
right?
mother who let her son die. She absolutely believes that she's. I mean, otherwise she wouldn't let it go.
For Sarah or Jeremy, do you think that a court should be allowed to step in and mandate the surgery?
Oh, didn't they do that with Jehovah's Witnesses?
They did.
With children?
They did.
And what was the outcome?
I'm not saying what did happen. I'm saying what should happen. Like, whatever.
Oh, okay.
Courts don't get it right all the time. Courts allowed separate but equal for 75 years.
It's a utilitarian question again. What is the greatest benefit to the greatest number of people?
Yeah, I'm gonna start making a drinking game out of every time you punt on a question.
But it's not really a utilitarian question, because we're talking about a child who's in need of medical treatment dying.
Right, that you are responsible for because they are not the age of 18.
Or the child is living.
Right.
There's nobody else dying there. There's no alternative weighing of the thing. There's just this unproven
but for them
idea.
That there is, that's what I'm saying. They think they have proof that if they let the child have surgery or get a blood transfusion, they will never be with them for eternity.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a utilitarian decision there for them.
And so what you're asking the government and or the court to come do is to step in and say, I think you're an idiot, mother, and we're basically going to strip you of the thing that you believe is most valuable in your heart and in your faith because we want your kid to live. And so what you're asking is a court to basically be like, look, we're not just going to kill your kid. We're going to strip your kid of their soul.
So, but, yeah, I'm not. So when it's a child who doesn't really have the ability to have an argument in this,
can't make their own
they
decisions.
don't have a say in whether they live or die. It's a parent making that decision for their child when the treatment is there for them.
Medically necessary, yeah.
Medically necessary and totally available.
So Sarah, what do you think? Do you think the government should be allowed to step in and mandate these surgeries for people that are declining them for their kids?
Again, it comes back to...
I don't know if I'm comfortable just being
right,
like, yes.
Just saying yes. It's a... to take it back to the conversation from last week.
Yeah.
It's that utilitarian decision. What my point was, so if you look at the utilitarian question from the last story where the question was, the child bride to stop the war.
Yeah.
And you have to set in rules. So if part of this whole equation is minors don't have the legal ability to represent themselves or choose for themselves, then it's primarily the responsibility of the parents, but the government has a responsibility to defend the child from their parents' decisions.
Yeah.
So the government does have a responsibility to protect children in this scenario. And so I think, yes, but it's then something the government has to weigh the pros and cons of.
I mean, when you think about it, it's interesting because the government protects children from their parents all the time. That's what the whatchamacallit
CPS
does. CPS does, right. They come out and they take your kids away because they're protecting the children from the parent. I guess the difference is in one case you're protecting the children from the parents because of physical abuse, drug addiction, molestation, things like that. In this case, the thing that is at risk is arguably different, right? It would be saying like,
but the thing,
I'm coming to take your kid away because you have prescribed to religion that I don't think is appropriate.
No. So what the government is coming in to do is keep the child from dying because of their parents' decisions.
Mm.
So I'd like to back that up, though. It's in this story. It seems to be that everyone has adopted this philosophy that the soul is in the appendix, right? So in this case, if the government was looking for the best interest of the child, if somebody had an appendix problem, that children needs to die. They can't have their appendix removed. So then it creates, I'm just like spinning off. Then it creates this like subculture of like, where can I go to get my kid's appendix removed without the government knowing, in a way. It becomes, not to bring up a whole other thing, it brings up the whole abortion thing. Because some people are like, it's not a soul. But other people are like, that fetus is a soul. It's a person. It's the exact, and then you get these underground clinics when abortion is illegal because people don't buy into this fetus is a soul, fetus is a person scenario.
That's an interesting comparison. I didn't draw that.
Yeah.
I didn't draw that line.
Because you would never want the government to step in to prevent, like I know both of you are probably pro-choice, and so you wouldn't want the government to step in to save that soul or save that thing by saying like no one can ever get an abortion. But yeah, there's an interesting parallel there. But then you have to take that leap.
But you're asking two people who think that a child isn't a child until it's actually here. So
right, sure.
We're probably going to answer that a little bit differently than somebody else might.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of, I get it. There's a lot of that inconsistency of the like, why can't a pregnant woman be in the carpool lane? But like, yeah. Your cat is just like doing supermodeling in front of the camera.
It's both of the cats at this point.
There's a lot of cat happening right now.
Yeah.
We miss Ligataro! So that's our catness right there.
So Ashley was doing some research on this, and what she found was...
Who's doing research?
Ashley was.
Who's doing research?
And
it's your turn for research.
What she found was that in the case of Jehovah's Witnesses, blood transfusions were being basically required by doctors when they were medically necessary. And eventually, it was like 2012? 2005, the government changed the law that said that was no longer permissible. That if the child's under 12 years old, the parent, not the doctor, has the final say, even at risk of life of the doctor.
I'm going to back that up.
Did I get it wrong?
So, yes.
Okay.
So, if your child is 12 years and under, the medical professional can disregard the parent's religious beliefs and perform a blood transfusion unless the parents have gone to court and proven that there is another alternative. There has to be a court order. If the child is 12 and older, the child's own belief comes into play. Where if the child is like, no, I refuse a blood transfusion or I accept one, then it disregards the parent's choice. That
12
was
years old, huh?
12. They switched it to 12.
But
Be a
that
heavy
law
decision.
but that law didn't come into place until 2005. Because up to that point, the parents always had the sort of say over the doctor. I'm sorry, the doctor always had to say over the parents.
Now,
Sorry.
they also brought up, sorry, it was a website talking about the court cases. They also brought up medical confidentiality because there are apparent Jehovah's Witnesses that opt to have a blood transfusion, but do so in fear that they're going to be ostracized by their religious community if they were to have found out. If they were to find out that they did have a blood transfusion. So it brings up the whole kind of HIPAA confidentiality thing. This is a perfect example. You have a appendix removed, but now you're ostracized from all the society.
Right, it's good. Like, how did they know? Who was telling?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, who was telling it? The
Clearly, it was Rolly or his
He
mom.
could have been like, I just had a spleen taken out. I don't know what you guys are talking about.
I had my tonsils taken out. They gave me lots of ice cream.
Yeah. Be like, surgeon, can you make my scar like really long so they can't tell exactly the entry point?
So let me ask you guys, as parents, since we always go back to the fact that Ashley and I aren't parents, are there any medical procedures that a doctor would advise you of that you would decline for your child? Or would you always defer to your doctor in all cases?
Well, your doctor is not the be-all and end-all. You can always seek second opinions, and you can have a medical team to seek the best possible advice from. And I think at some point as a parent, even though I feel like I know my children really well and I have their best interests at heart, I'm not a medical professional.
Sure.
So I would probably defer. Well, I would defer
in all
to
cases.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now,
I mean, when I was deciding... Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, medical professionals can disagree with each other. So at some point, you have to go and trust in someone, in a variety of people, and make your own decision.
And you would have to do that with yourself, too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure. So, Jeremy, you're the same thing? Like, you, off the top of your head, you can't come up with a scenario where, like, a team of medical professionals would give you advice and you'd be like, no.
It would probably depend on the scenario. I understand why some cancer patients will opt to not receive treatment because the treatment is worse than, potentially worse than.
I'm going to reverse that. What if sorry to make it be all like gory, but what if your child has cancer and your kid is like, I do not want chemo. I do not want chemo. Do you force that on your kid?
To a certain extent, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you, as a guardian, you force the best interest of the child on the child in spite of their own choices. Their own opinions. Yeah.
I mean, that's most of parenting.
but wait a minute.
Forcing them to do things they don't want to do because they're in their best interest.
Yeah.
Right. That's a good point. But Sarah, I'm going to put this on you. But isn't that what the government is trying to do as well? Doesn't the government view themselves as an uber parent enforcing their better knowledge on you as a parent?
In what scenario?
In the case of medical procedures. Like, there are parents who don't believe in either vaccinations or don't believe in having wisdom teeth removed or don't believe in whatever, or having their kids' skin pierced. Like, I think the government would argue, just like as the parent of your child, you know what's in their best interest. We as the government, as the parent of you in society, know what is in your best interest.
Right. And they also have to balance everybody in the case of vaccinations, where we need a herd immunity, and so everybody should be getting vaccinations. And
our government is also supposed to be making decisions for the society that are separated from any sort of religious doctrine or belief.
Sure.
Because if they start using religious morality as a compass, then we have to pick a religion.
I'd like to back up to last week's story. We already agreed that those in power and elected into office may not always vote or agree in the best interest, knowing that their children aren't going to be affected in a way. Like going to war. Well, I can protect my kid from going to war. In this case, I know a loophole that my kid doesn't have to get a vaccine or what have you. So it's interesting that we entrust in the government so much to protect us, yet they themselves, we've already showed some cracks in the egg, that they themselves aren't always acting in the best interest of the people because they have a loop around.
Right, but I think we know that about governments, and that we try to make governments who do behave in the best interests of everybody, knowing that individual politicians are also just interested in their own power.
They're just people. Yeah.
They're just people.
Yeah. Do you guys have, I'm going to wrap this up, but do you guys have any parting things? I know sometimes people have things where like, I really want to talk about this. Did we miss anything that was on your like hit list?
Not for me.
Okay, Sarah?
I think I'm good. Thank you.
I have to revisit. So you're not going to send your soul now for $1?
No.
So one of the
I'm not going to
things.
sell my soul on the piece of paper anymore. I changed my mind during the podcast.
I feel like the story gave.
Can I just eat the piece of paper and like get my soul back in me?
So we talked about this. Kolby's definition of a soul is a person's character. And in a sense, it's like an accumulation of like, oh, you've been through some stuff. And in that regard, here's this kid who's 12, had his appendix removed. Can he no longer continue to develop that character, to develop a new soul, if you will?
In the story, I would argue that's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
I don't think we have enough information.
Yeah.
And I would say, in the case of this story, getting rid of your appendix, selling your appendix, where there is something attached to it, is different than signing a piece of paper and selling that.
How is it different?
Because by signing a piece of paper, I'm not really giving you my soul if I have one.
Yeah, no, in the story, the piece of paper thing's totally irrelevant because now we actually know that you can't sell it.
Right.
Yeah, no, you're right. But that does bring up the question, which I don't want to get down to this whole rabbit hole.
Sorry.
Of doing an appendix transplant. Like if you lose your appendix because it's infected and you're like, I sure would like a soul. And so you like buy one from some like poor kid in India.
But I think they said once it's out of the body, they scan it and it's no longer
gone,
there.
So you can't do
you can't do a soul transplant.
And at any rate, this one's gone longer than the other ones. I think they're all starting to get into the 40-minute marker range. I actually don't mind that. This seems like as the stories have gotten better, our discussions have gotten longer just because there's more interestingness going on. So I'm
more to discuss.
Yeah, there is more to discuss. Like I'm totally, the last two stories we've done, I just am like, that's 3 or 4. I'm just like, blew my mind. At any rate, you've been listening to After Dinner Conversation, short stories for long discussions, with myself, Kolby, and Ashley, and Jeremy, and Sarah joining us, which is amazing because she's super cool. Feel free to download our stories on our website, afterdinnerconversation.com.
Jeremy's super cool too.
He's,
and this person right next to you, I was like, she got super cool. Like
Jeremy,
not just cool, like it's super cool.
Jeremy for sure has a soul. That I'm positive of.
Now Sarah has a questionable soul.
I don't know Sarah well enough to judge these things.
I'm a high school teacher. This is the only time I've ever been super cool, Ashley. So
No, what you meant to say, Ashley, I'm a high school teacher. That means I do have a soul.
Yeah, right?
Oh, gosh. That's very sweet of you. Thank you.
Yeah. And a rock you continually push up a hill. Yeah. Okay, so Patreon, please support us on patreon.com/afterdinnerconversation. Like and subscribe. It means the world to us. It doesn't leave you up to algorithms defining us. And thank you for allowing us to continue to do what we do. We just have a blast doing it. So thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
If you've enjoyed listening to this, please like and subscribe. It helps us out a ton. You know, the vast majority of people haven't liked and subscribed, which means maybe it shows up in your algorithm, maybe it doesn't. So don't leave that to chance. Just go ahead and hit that button, and we'd sure appreciate that. And that way we can keep doing what we're doing, and you're not left to the whims of some algorithm. Thanks.